There's not enough light there. Okay. Hi guys. Oh, there we go. All right, let me change my settings here for a second. All right. So welcome to the evolution exam review. As usual, go ahead and say hi, Eliana. Go ahead and type any questions you have, and I will answer them. Okay. So yeah, go ahead. Hi, Lucy.
What's it hi, Lucy?
Because my mommy student Lucy is saying hi to you. You say hi. Okay. So couple things to remember for the evolution exam. It does cover all of evolution there, so you will see all of the topics covered. To help you study in Google Classroom, I have put another review sheet, so keep that in mind. The answers are not up yet, but I will put the answers up later. No, thank you, baby. Okay. You want to go play?
Yeah.
You want to stay? Okay. So the result of the oxygen catastrophe is that originally, remember, there was not very much oxygen on Earth, right? So most organisms. Oh no! Don't push anything. Nope. Why don't you go get something to show the students? Okay.
Okay. I'm gonna show my dog.
Okay. So basically, what that means is that there wasn't very much oxygen originally, right? But when photosynthetic cyanobacteria start to evolve, then they started generating oxygen, and now that oxygen changed the balance of the gases. First in the ocean, hi Anita, and then it also changed. And when it came out of the ocean, out of the water, and went into the atmosphere, it started reacting with the carbon dioxide and the methane, and essentially it changed the balance of the gases in the atmosphere, and that triggered the ice age, which then killed off most organisms. Hi everyone. So because of that, it really initially kind of like triggered this mass extinction, meaning like almost everything died. But then when that that ice age was over, right, the organisms that survived it were able to essentially rebuild. Okay, you want to show them, Elsa? Okay. All right.
No, Anna.
Oh, Anna. Okay, sorry. Okay, Arshia, you said, what is stereoscopic vision? So stereoscopic vision is what we have, which is eyes in the front of our head, right? If you think about like a human compared to a horse, their eyes are on the side of their head, which means that stereoscopic vision basically gives you the ability to see more like depth perception. That's why when we were doing the lab and you were tossing the beanbag, the idea is with two eyes, you generally have a better idea of gauging how far away you are. It's harder to do when it's only one eye because you don't have that depth perception. Well, we have to know the articles and video lectures we did as classroom. I would say, like, concept-wise, you need to know the topics, right? So the oxygen event, I expect you to know. I think it was bacteria, right? The antibiotics and bacteria lecture, I need you to know. So anything you took notes on, you should consider fair game. Yes, if you would like some more VIS practice, I can put some up tomorrow. So, or I'll try to do it tonight if I can. So you can go ahead and do that. I mean, I can go ahead and do that. Okay. What else?
Mine. Hello. Mine.
No yelling, please. She just wants to see. It's okay. Okay. Did you eat your dinner? Thank you. No problem. Yeah, just give me a little bit to put some stuff together, okay? Let's see, other details. What else do you guys have questions about? Third period students, remember, like I said, I haven't seen you guys yet, but there is an extra review sheet on the.
I can't wait to meet my friends.
Okay, thank you, baby. The neural tube defect. So essentially, when your spinal cord forms, what happens is it goes from like a flat piece of tissue to like closing up into a tube, and so folate is really important for doing that. So a neural tube defect is basically when that tube doesn't close up properly, and the organism is basically missing part of their brain or their spinal cord, and so folate.
Cheers.
Okay, thank you, baby. Why don't you go find Gina? Go find Gina. So folate is important for that, but the problem is that UV light destroys folate. So, oh, sorry. So living in an area where there's a lot of UV light, like closer to the equator, then humans would have to have ways of essentially blocking that UV light. What do you have to know about Ardipithecus and Australopithecus? Actually, I don't. For the exam, we wanted you to know
of the Queen of Owl.
Okay, I need you to go play over there, okay? Or you have to be quiet. Can you do that? Okay, thank you.
Want to be ponytail?
Okay, but be quiet. Thank you. So, we did it in the lab so you would have some context of like. We did it so you'd have some context.
Because I like.
Sorry.
Because I like
Can you
it.
go sing over there? Can you go sing on the? You go sing with the couch with the car. Go put her in the car. You wanna try and put her in the car? Okay.
Yeah.
So basically I don't need you to know all the specific like timelines or anything. I wanted you to see those so that you could see the progression of the traits. But don't worry about like details about the specific other hominids and things like that. Hi, Daniel. What other questions have you guys got?
Because I like it. Because I like it. Because my hair all like. My hair is all nice.
Sorry, they're very loud right now. So the reason why a woman from Central Africa's baby is not likely to have any neural tube defects, again, is because she has a lot of melanin in her skin. Melanin is what blocks the UV light. So for her, she would not have the issue of the melanin, of the UV light, essentially destroying the folate in her body and then putting her at risk for a neural tube defect. But for a woman who is fair-skinned and doesn't have that much melanin, then the UV light will get to her, will be able to get past her skin and essentially destroy the folate in her body and then cause her to not have enough folate. Sorry. Okay. Eliana, a little bit quieter, okay? Thank you. What are the human impacts of this? So human impact, yes, artificial selection is one for sure, right? Because the idea is that with human impact is any time that we are impacting the other species on Earth. And so to some extent that is, poaching, it is hunting. It could also be just like when we bulldoze an area to, like let's say a swamp and we turn it into condos, right? We are fragmenting habitats or destroying habitats, and that's an issue. Let's see. Does artificial selection impact the natural ecosystem in any way? It doesn't necessarily. I mean, if humans are breeding those organisms and in a space where they're not interacting with the ecosystem outside, then no, it's not, right? It definitely, causes, changes to species and such, but not necessarily. It depends, right? If those organisms would have to be introduced in the wild, then yeah. Two populations are considered two different species if they cannot reproduce or their offspring can't reproduce. Right. Essentially, like, that's how we define a species. A species is defined as you are unable to successfully reproduce with another species, right? Again, think of it kind of more dramatically, but like a cat can't reproduce with a cow because they don't have lots of different reasons. Sometimes, and there's sort of two parts to that, right? Can't reproduce means you also can't perpetuate. Like, you can't have a cat and a cow mate and then have like a half cat, half cow that has now more baby half cat, half cows, right? Because you want to be like not just in single organism, but it goes all the way down. Baby, can you go show your dolly to your sisters, please? No? Okay, then you have to use an inside voice, okay? Yes, you should know the oxygen catastrophe for the exam. I mean, just to the extent of what you saw on the video guide that I had you watch, right? I mean, not specific details, like I'm not asking about the name of the the glaciation event or whatever, none of that stuff. But the big idea, right? The idea of how did we end up with a planet that now has so much oxygen when originally there was virtually none. What do we need to know about bacteria? I would say the stuff that's in the lecture, right? So understanding the idea of how bacteria work and then also how they relate to antibiotic resistance, and the ways that, we sort of as humans in using all these antibacterial products are speeding up the evolution of bacteria. Yes, you should know about the different types of evolution evidence, more in the context of like how does it support the theory of evolution. In terms of macro and micro evolution, I don't need you to know those terms. It's just the overall idea that, sorry, she's very loud. Okay, Anna, go get Gina for me. Can you go get Gina for me? Please. Okay, then you have to be very quiet. Okay, thank you. And we're not getting it right. Okay. So microevolution is just the idea of like population genetics and allele frequencies and things like that, whereas macroevolution tends to describe more the idea of the idea of natural selection, right? The population's changing and traits, showing up or leading, etc. in the population. Taxonomy, we didn't really talk about that too much. We used to, but we don't really so much, so I wouldn't worry about that. How do you determine what is a species? I would have to define it for you, right? I don't expect you to just know who is or is not a different species. So you would look for, certain key details. Yes, but we're not eating those right now, okay? You wait for Daddy to come in. Thank you. Okay, can you go get a bowl for me? Okay.
Because I need outside, not inside.
Okay, thank you. So hopefully that kind of gives you an idea what, how in terms of species, like I would have to tell you things like they can't mate together or that they are, that they are somehow reproductively isolated. Remember, that's the key word, right? They have to be somehow unable to mate, whether that's geographically they're isolated or their body parts don't match up, which is mechanical isolation, or they have behavioral isolation such that they don't recognize mating behaviors as from the other group. In terms of cladograms, I do expect you to know how to draw one as well as read one. So be prepared to do both of those things. The video, okay, thank you. The video that is attached to the Human Evolution Lab is actually a really nice overview of cladograms. So if you need a review of how to read them and how they work, definitely look at that, okay? Will everything you learned about evolution be on the exam? Everything is fair game. Like I said, you'll see things to varying degrees depending on, how much it was already covered. Because, so there's variety, obviously. But yes, you are responsible for everything in the evolution unit. Do you need to know bacilli, cocci, and spirilla for the exam? No. I mean, that was just to give you some examples of the variation in bacteria because you don't want to think of things as like, all the things that in, all the possible things in bacteria. But that's it. The 4 components of natural selection. If you look in your natural selection notes, there's actually a section like towards the top of the paper where it says like 1, 2, 3, 4. And those are the 4. The characteristics for genetic equilibrium, I think what you're referring to is the 5 conditions that have to be present in order for a population to be in genetic equilibrium. So remember, genetic equilibrium means that the population is the allele frequencies are not changing. So the 5 things that have to be true in order for that to be the case is, number 1, you have a large population. Number 2, you have no migration. Nobody can moving in or out. You have no mutations. You have random mating, and you have no natural selection. So the idea is that if all of those things were true, then the frequency of alleles doesn't change, right? Your percentage of alleles is staying the same because you have an equal likelihood of everybody, of the offspring getting those alleles, etc. And then you don't have any new alleles coming in. Okay, for example, when an animal evolves. So what you're talking about in this case, first of all, is probably would look essentially, it would be mimicry, right? If one organism evolves to look like another because that it gives it more more survival and reproductive success. It probably would, yes, it would be random though. It's not like this squirrel says, I want to look like a wolf, so I'm going to make myself look like a wolf, right? It's rather the idea that if by chance there are mutations that make it look more like, let's say, a predator so that other predators avoid it, then it would survive and reproduce. But also keep in mind, it's not usually like this drastic change where all of a sudden it looks like something else. It's accumulated mutations. So over time, if one mutation helps it and then it develops more and more of mutations, that after a very long time you would see these organisms start to look more and more like that other organism because that gave it the ability to survive and therefore reproduce. Do genetic drifts promote rapid speciation? No, not necessarily. Remember, genetic drift is just the idea that not natural selection is causing the population to evolve, right? Like if by chance all of a sudden a cyclone swept through an area and just happened to destroy all of the purple flowers in the area, it's not that the purple flowers had some disadvantage or were selected against. It just means they happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. But now what that means is when the population now continues to grow, you're going to have a lower percentage of purple flowers, right? Compared to, let's say, I don't know, yellow flowers. And so the population will have evolved to have more yellow flowers and purple, but by chance. So I wouldn't say that genetic drift promotes rapid speciation. It could in some cases, but not in the sense of, it's not the genetic drift itself. It's more the idea that like if there maybe are new ecological niches that open up because a bunch of organisms were taken out, then new species could move into that area. Let's see. For bacteria, will we need to know the regeneration rate and the number of bacteria that carry? I never talked about that, so no, I don't need you to know that. The only thing I really want you to know about bacteria is that they reproduce very quickly. So because they reproduce quickly, right, they have a short generation time, then that means that basically it means that the bacteria are going to be able to evolve fairly quickly, right? Remember we saw that video where in a span of 11 days, they were able to develop antibiotic resistance because every 20 minutes they're dividing. And so every 20 minutes, that means mutations that are potentially useful are potentially happening, and therefore they might be able to then help. Okay, let me see if I can, I think the light's in your eyes, so let me see if that helps. What is the big idea for human impact on evolution regarding what we did in class? Really, the big idea is I want you to know who is selected for and who is selected against, right? So the idea that for humans with our activity, not intentionally, we select for generalists, right? Organisms that kind of can do well anywhere and can go with the flow and adjust. Or organisms we like, obviously, or they're very tolerant of things like pollution and disturbance because we disturb a lot of natural areas. Whereas we select against organisms that are specialists, right? Because when we take out an area that is a certain environment, a certain habitat, and if they're the ones that, if they can only live in that one space, now we have selected against them, right? Or if they need a lot of space, if we're taking up their space, now they can't have that space and they can't survive as well. So that's sort of the big idea. I would say if you want to sort of think about from that worksheet, what you need to know is think about the big bullet points. And then on the back, there's the big idea. Let's see. For the random mating thing, random mating, again, just is the idea that there is no preference that organisms have for one trait over another, right? That because it means you have an equal likelihood of getting every allele, then it means that no one allele is going to be selected against or for. But don't worry about like how random is random. It's just the overall idea. If the ecosystem keeps changing, so what is selected for is changing. I wouldn't say that everything dies, no, but I think the overall idea is that if ecosystems change really quickly, organisms often can't adapt as quickly, right? So it is possible then that they have now a disadvantage and they can't survive. It's not that sorry, that just jumped really fast. So reproductive isolation promotes species or causes speciation. How rapid it is depends on, various conditions. So I wouldn't necessarily propose rapid speciation. It could, but just the idea that it promotes speciation, right? Because when you have reproductive isolation, that is at the crux of what the definition of speciation is. No, thank you, baby. Okay. What is a fused chromosome? Okay, we didn't actually talk about that, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. But if you might remember in the human evolution video. No, thank you, baby. In the human evolution worksheet, one of the videos you watched.
Kitchen table.
You want to go to the kitchen table? Okay.
Mom, why did you sit there? Why did you sit there?
No, I sit there later, okay? The idea is that when you look at humans and chimps, we have 46 chromosomes, and I think they have 48. So the idea is that we share a lot of DNA, and they think that potentially, essentially, like 2 chromosomes fused together to cause us to have different numbers of chromosomes. But it's part of the support for the overall idea. Okay, you go to the kitchen table things. Okay, can you go help Daddy? Thank you. Okay. Oh, Daddy needs you. What are primitive traits? Primitive traits are essentially like traits that are at the sort of the base of a cladogram. And how does it follow through generations? It just means that there are certain traits that are already present and they continue to be present, right? It's not like everything that was present in a really older organism just disappears, right? Things change, but not everything has to change. Will the key be posted tonight? I assume you mean the key to the evolution study guide. Yes, I should be able to post it tonight, but it might be a little bit later tonight. Cultural evolution it's just the idea that how culture also drives evolution, right? Like biological evolution is more the idea of like genes and whatnot changing. It's not that they're mutually exclusive. It's just the idea that, there are different aspects to it and how one's culture, like, diet, etc., might influence then how organisms evolve. Inbreeding is when family members reproduce with one another. The test will be very similar to tests you've had in the past, right? A significant number of multiple choice, maybe some matching, and, a short answer question or two. Yeah, Matthew, don't worry about all those terms, hybridization, morphology. Hybridization usually means like putting 2 things together, whether it's like 2 pieces of DNA or RNA and whatnot. But again, I haven't mentioned in class, I haven't supposed to know that. Morphology is the idea of like body structures and things like that. The molecular evidence for evolution, Anita, then is the idea that it's not just that we see similarities in physical characteristics. Right now, we can actually look at the DNA and the protein sequences of various organisms. So, for example, when we compare like proteins that we find, let's say in us and squirrels and cats and fish, right? We look to see what the sequence of nucleotides is. And the fact that there's a fair amount of similarity between them is also evidence for evolution. And we can also see where if 2 organisms or 2 species have similar sequences for the same protein, then it also suggests that they are more related, right, than 2 species who do not. What is the 5th evidence for evolution, not including fossil records, comparative anatomy? What? Move my leg, please. Okay. Let's see. Comparative anatomy, fossil record, DNA, embryology. Let me see. I'd have to think of what that is here too. Oh, you have milk? You want to show them your milk? Okay. Again, taxonomy is actually about like classification, which we didn't get into, so don't worry about that. what is it called when two species help each other's evolution? That is called coevolution. So when two species essentially drive the evolution of each other, like their interaction, that's what we call coevolution. Okay, Anna, stop, please. Thank you. Let's see. Oh, sorry, I missed a question there. If two different species live near each other and had compatible reproductive parts and mated around the same time, could they intermate? Okay. Possibly. Oh no. Can you get him a napkin, please? Go get a paper towel. Thank you. Oh, you can't. Yes, you can. I will help you.
That's not a paper towel.
I know, but it's good enough for now. So possibly they could, but not always, right? And what I mean by that is it's also a matter of, I mean, this is more complicated than we need to get into, but essentially mating is not, successful reproduction for organisms is not just whether or not they can physically mate. Once they do mate, right, and the cells, the sperm and egg come together, another big question is, do the chromosome numbers match up? May I show them your milk? Okay, thank you. So when they, for example, if two species do physically match.
Warm it up, please.
Then you go ask Daddy to warm it up.
No.
I can't do it. You have to ask Daddy. Okay. So if they can't mate, sorry, Sahana, I'll answer your antibiotic and bacteria thing in a second. So if they can mate, but the chromosomes don't match up, then sometimes, for example, horses and donkeys, right? That's a really good example of where they can physically mate. They produce a mule, but it's still not considered a new species because the chromosome numbers don't match up between the horse and the donkey. And so the mule is not able to do meiosis itself to make its own gametes effectively to mate with another mule. If we are carbon-based, then how can we use... So carbon-based just means that our bodies are made of carbon. It doesn't mean we use carbon dioxide, right? I mean, carbon is present in a lot of things. It's present in glucose, it's present in fats, it's present in proteins. So, the fact that we use oxygen and not carbon dioxide has more to do with the metabolic reactions that happen in our bodies, which is cellular respiration and not photosynthesis. What is the basic definition for antibiotics and bacteria? So bacteria, there is no basic definition, I would say. I would say with bacteria, you want to know that they are prokaryotes, they are unicellular, they don't have a nucleus or other membrane-bound organelles, things like that. Antibiotics then are specific medicines that actually originally derived from other bacteria and fungi that can either kill other bacteria or slow down their reproduction. And each antibiotic is very specific because it attacks a really specific part of the bacteria's mechanism. But that's also why potentially, because it's so specific, then it's very easy, not easy, it's more possible for the bacteria to evolve a resistance to that particular thing or that particular way of stopping it. Is it possible to mate a plant and an animal? I would say no, in the context of the body part, the chromosomes don't match up and things just don't. Okay. Looks like other people have answered your question about animals and depression, so we'll move on from that one since it's not really an evolution question. But it's a good thing to think about, but we're not going to go there right now, right? Okay, what other questions do you guys have? Let's see. VIST. Well, until someone asks me a question, I'm going to talk about VIST. Oh, okay. Yes, I can repeat the definition for antibiotics. Or no? You don't want it? Okay. Okay. You're good? Okay. If you want me to repeat it, don't worry. I can totally do that. Oh, yes, you need it. Okay. Yes, I will look. Okay, so it's okay. All right, let me start with antibiotics. Again, antibiotics are compounds, essentially, like amoxicillin, neomycin, streptomycin, penicillin, right? They're compounds that originally developed in, yes, Anika, I see your questions, don't worry. I think I answered your taxonomy one, but I'll come back in a second. So basically, what happens with antibacteria, right, is there's sort of a co-evolution between bacteria and other bacteria and then bacteria and fungi. And so they made these compounds that would help them to essentially one-up the other one. And antibiotics are the compounds that we pull out from those bacteria and fungi that are essentially now become new medicines, right? So antibiotics are really specific because they, sorry, it's so noisy back there. My children are very loud, or my one child at the moment. So what happens in this case is they're very specific, right? Like one antibiotic might like affect the ability of the bacteria to do like, transcription, or it might affect like their cell wall or something like that, right? And so they're very specific medicines, molecules that are able to either stop the growth of these E. coli, these bacteria, or stop the growth, kill them essentially, right? And so the thing with their specifics, right? Sort of the same idea like generalists versus specifics, specialists. So with that now becomes possible, and that if a bacteria now develops a mutation that can counteract what an antibiotic does, then it's, problematic. Yeah, totally. Antibiotics are generally a good thing. I mean, we use them to fight all sorts of bacterial infections that we don't want. The problem is that if they are overused, we know that bacteria will continue to evolve, right? I mean, even if we do nothing, bacteria are evolving. The problem is when we start helping them along by saying, well, if we have antibiotics, we're going to kill all the harmless bacteria and we're only going to leave behind the strongest bacteria, right? And we now make it easier for them to basically flourish and survive. Whereas, so it's definitely an issue now because we're speeding up their evolution, right? So the idea would be if we could not use. How difficult will the exam be? It's not meant to be tricky, right? But I mean, as you've seen in the past, like you have to read the questions carefully and you have to make sure that, so, if you understand the concepts, I would say generally it's not meant to be super hard, but again, there's a lot of material too. So I think that's a general challenge with all exams, right? When there's a lot of material, then it's hard to maybe get it all. Okay. Let me go back for Como. I do see yours, don't worry. Anika, I know you asked about taxonomy. Taxonomy has to do with like classification of organisms, which quite quick answer is we're not going to worry about that. I didn't talk about it, so don't worry about it. Okay, so VIST. Let's talk about VIST for a minute. Remember? So V is for variation. Think of it as you want to be concise but complete in your VIST. So with variation, what you should be addressing in one sentence or so is what is the specific variation and trait that exists in the population? You're not telling me who did better or worse. You're just telling me, and I'm going to use the giraffe neck example from your lecture, just to sort of give you context, right? A successful VIST would be to say in a population you had for giraffes that had a range of neck lengths ranging from short to long. The key thing here is to make sure that you're giving me a range, although in some cases it isn't a range, right? I mean, if it was something like blood type, it would be like A, B, and O, or et cetera, right? But in a lot of cases, there's a range where you're saying, okay, it ranges from this to this. You don't want to make it actually, if it's not super discrete, you don't want to make it seem discrete. You wouldn't want to say like, I only had short and I only had long neck giraffes and I had nobody in between, right? So you would say, okay, let me give a range. And so that's your one sentence for V, right? Don't tell me in the V, like who did better, who did worse, smaller, longer necks are increasing, et cetera. You just say, here's the variation that exists, but be specific. You don't want to say there was a variation in neck length and then stop. You would want to say, what is that range in neck length? So short to long or something like that, right? Or some other times people say things like, there were some that had longer necks and some that had shorter necks. Even using that shorter or longer automatically gives you that comparative language. It implies a range. For I, which is inheritance, again, should only be about one sentence. that's where you're basically telling me, how is this particular trait that we're talking about inherited? So again, using my neck length example, I would say, well, neck length in giraffes is a genetically inherited trait that is passed on through sexual reproduction. Like that would be sort of a full, complete answer. I don't need more than that. S should be your most significant portion, right? So your S should be where you're telling me what the selection is. And I think for some teachers, I think like for Mr. H, he is also stressing that you have to say that what the selection pressure is, right? But the overall idea is that you want to say who is selected for or who is selected against. You don't have to do both, but pick one. You can say like, long neck giraffes were selected for, and then tell me why, which is, okay, they're selected for because their longer necks allow them to reach the vegetation higher up and eat it. And therefore, because they have food, they can survive and reproduce. The final piece of that is you have to be able to say what happens after they survive, after they are selected for, right? That they survive and reproduce. If you just say long neck giraffes do better, that doesn't tell me why that's significant. So you need to basically say, here's who's selected for or selected against. Here's why they're selected for or selected against. And as a result, they survive and reproduce more. And then finally, you're ending with T, right? T is for time. Don't just tell me how much time passed. That's not also complete, right? The idea is to say that over many generations, right? And it's sort of indicating a reasonable amount of time. Tell me what happened to the population at large. You should also make sure it's not making it sound like the giraffes like all shrunk their necks or something like that, right? The idea is that over time, because the long necks are selected for and the short necks are selected against, that the overall average length of a giraffe's neck goes up. Let's see. So hopefully that helps with VIST. Is there a finite amount of antibiotics you can use? Well, no, I mean, it's potentially possible, right? But scientists are definitely trying to develop new antibiotics. They're also trying to develop other ways other than antibiotics to, stop bacterial infections and things like that. So, yes, of course, if we get to a point where they do worry, of course, you have these like multi-resistant bacteria and they're harder to kill, but it's not to say they're impossible. No, biotech stuff is not on your exam. I don't know that an extra strong antibiotic would kill all bacteria because, again, antibiotics tend to be very specific and there are such a variety of bacteria that it means not, and then some might have mutations that allow them to get around those things, that it's not a general, like bleach kind of just clumps all the proteins together. So then it doesn't matter what kind of bacteria you are, right? But an antibiotic, again, tends to be very specific. So if that particular aspect of it isn't present in a bacteria, they're not going to be affected by the antibiotic. Let's see. You do not need to know the 3 types of hominids, at least not for me. If you're not my student, I can't guarantee that one. Again, antibiotics, it's not the antibiotic develops new ways to fight bacteria. It's that bacteria develop new molecules, which are antibiotics, right? So it's the coevolution. It's like a constant competition that if, let's say, a bacteria and a fungus are competing with each other, right? And the fungus makes a molecule that's going to kill the bacteria, then it's now sort of done better in the competition, right? But then now if the bacteria develop a mutation that allows them to resist that antibiotic, then it goes up. But now maybe the fungus says, well, now I can make another compound that's going to get you this way. So it kind of keeps going up. Yes, Anita, that is an excellent summary. Antibiotics are compounds made from a coevolution of bacteria and fungi and acts as a medicine to fight bacterial infections. Yes, exactly. No, if your VIST is too long, it's not that it'll lose points. It just gets harder for me to read. And so the chances of me understanding what you want to say kind of goes down, right? Because if it's too all over the place, and I might miss the main point you're trying to make. How many questions will your exam be? To be honest, I'm still working on it, so I don't know the exact number. It'll probably be around 45 to 50 points, but obviously certain things were worth a little bit more. So I'll, that kind of thing. Oh, inheritance. Yes. So inheritance is, again, it should be pretty simple. Like, don't overthink the inheritance. What you want to say with the inheritance is simply that there is, this trait, again, I'll use neck length, right? That neck length is a genetically inherited trait. What you don't want to say is that neck length is passed down from parent to child, because passed down is too general a word, right? Like, I can pass down my love of, I don't know, popcorn from me to my children. It's not genetically determined. It's just saying I like popcorn and now I teach them to like popcorn too, right? So ideally you want to say that X number, that the trait is genetically inherited, and then you could talk about how it is passed down through like sexual reproduction or horizontal gene transfer, but that would only be in bacteria. And yes, again, for selection, there's select for or select against, so just do one of them. You don't have to do both. I don't know if I missed anybody's question, so I'm going to just scroll up for a minute and make sure I didn't miss anybody's questions.
I want all of my friends to come here. They want all of my friends.
I'm not seeing any at the moment, so if I did, please let me know. Let me see.
I'm going to show them.
What other questions have you guys got here?
Where are you?
Okay. Let's see. So, someone was asking about the 5 pieces of evidence of evolution. So just going to go back over that for a second. A fossil record, embryology. I think the one that was missed was geographic distribution, comparative anatomy, which would be like homologous or analogous structures, and then the biochemistry, which is the DNA, RNA comparisons. Okay. How do I remember homologous versus analogous? Honestly, that's kind of hard. Like, you kind of just have to memorize that one, right? Remember that homologous structures, well, maybe one thing is like, homo means same, right? So homologous structures means this physical structure, like the bone structure or whatnot, is the overall structure is the same, but the function now is different, right? Like when you look at the bones for our arms and a bat wing and a whale flipper, you would never say like, oh, they're all used for the same thing. But they technically, if you look at the bone structure, they are. And so that those bone structures would indicate those are homologous structures, right? They indicate that there was a common ancestor that they all diverged from. Whereas analogous structures mean they are structures that are maybe used for the same thing, like a bird wing and a butterfly wing. But if you look at their physical structure and what makes them up is actually very different. So that would be as a result of what we call convergent evolution, right? That similar selective pressures cause them to evolve similarly. Is the founder effect okay? Yeah, thank you. Good job. Yes. So the difference between bottleneck effect and founder effect. Oh, okay. Hold on, Mr. Chow. The difference between bottleneck effect and founder effect is simply how the population has that dramatic change, right? In both cases, it's by chance. In both cases, it's not because somebody has an advantage over someone else. But with bottleneck effect, it's the idea that you had this population and by chance it got drastically reduced. Like you had 1,000 squirrels, some of which were purple and some of which were blue. And by chance, a tornado comes through and kills a lot of the purple squirrels, and your resulting population is going to end up more blue, not because blue was a better characteristic, but just by chance, more purple squirrels got killed. Whereas founder effect would be like if those 1,000 squirrels, right, a group of them move out to start their own new colony and become geographically isolated such that they cannot reproduce with the original population. And now it happens to, let's say originally you had 50% purple and 50% blue squirrels, right? And now that small group that leaves the population is actually, happens to be like 25% purple and 75% blue. Then the new population they start is going to be more blue than purple. No, I mean, bottleneck, it doesn't have to be natural disasters. It's just the easiest way to describe it. A bottleneck can happen from things like overhunting too. It just means something by chance drastically reduces the population. And as a result, there's just a lot less diversity typically, but also it's not representative of the original population. Yes, Ajit, that's pretty much so. No, so no. So with bottleneck and founder effect, they're both by chance. Neither is on purpose. Geographic distribution just means like where I find the organisms, right? The fact that I find similar organisms in this location and that location, and the environments are very different, but they evolve similar structures, for example, would be evidence of convergent evolution. Minsu, I would say study your human evolution paper that I gave you. I don't necessarily need you to do it from the textbook. We didn't really talk about it from the textbook, and you can, but I think textbook has more information than I need you to know at the moment. If an entire species is selected against, then that species would go extinct.
Why you're not a baby?
Why you not a baby?
I'm a baby.
Sorry, and I think I got your geographic distribution question now, right? For evidence for evolution, it's actually from a worksheet we did, like I think it was the second day. It's called 15-3. And so if you want to look for the evidence for evolution, you can look in your textbook in chapter 15, section 3. The example of founder effect that I told you about in class was the Amish people, right? The population of individuals, Pennsylvania Dutch, who have a really high incidence of certain things like dwarfism, because it probably happened to be that the group that left and started that colony had more alleles for dwarfism than the average population. Okay. I don't know that everybody with blue eyes is necessarily descended from one person, but the idea would be that everything has to come.
Mommy, move it.
Okay.
I have applesauce.
Thank you.
I saved.
Okay, thank you. It's just the idea that over time the genes would be passed to many people, right? So if, for example,
Applesauce.
okay, good. Thank you, Eliana. So, for example, it doesn't have to be blue eyes. It could be any trait, right? The idea that over time, if that trait is passed down, let's say from one parent to 3 children, and those 3 children pass it on to their 10 children, right? Then over time, you're going to have, of course, and that's, it's not selected against, right? Then you would see over time potentially more and more individuals with that trait. But it does have to start with one mutation, yes. Yes. Well, I mean, geographic distribution is the idea that, you would find that sort of, it's how it supports the theory of evolution.
Hello, my name is Applesauce. My name is Applesauce. My name is Applesauce.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Applesauce. My name is Applesauce. Ben.
Well, I think that with mitochondrial DNA, you can, with mitochondrial DNA, sorry, there's extra noise there. Mitochondrial DNA, can be traced through the maternal lines. That doesn't mean that all women have the same mitochondrial DNA, because there can also still be, over time, right, mutations and whatnot to that. In fact, if it were true that all women have the same mitochondrial DNA, then that would not allow scientists to figure out like how people are related from a maternal line, right, which they actually have done before. But you don't need to know that for this exam anyways. No, you do not need to, Gina. No, thank you. Okay.
This is Barbie.
Okay. You need to go help them in there, please. Okay?
No, that is.
I know, but go over there, please. It's Joe. Go, please. Thank you. Do we need? No, you mean like Ardipithecus and Lucy? No, you don't need to know those particular names. I think in the very beginning you may have missed Gina. I asked you to go. Thank you. In the beginning of the review session, I mentioned this, but I don't know if everyone here was here yet. Basically, we gave you all those sort of contexts and things for like the timeline, just so you'd sort of see how certain traits developed. Go ahead. But it's not necessarily that I don't need you to know the names of them or anything. Lucy was the first sort of, I think Lucy, if I remember correctly, was the first. No, Gina. It was the first fossil of human-like organisms that they found where they saw indications of bipedalism. Then eat something different, please. Okay. Again, no, you do not need to know the stages of human evolution, but I would want you to know what the significant traits were that contribute to human evolution, right? Like bipedalism, opposable thumbs, and stereoscopic vision. How are you going to eat that?
I can eat.
Wash it, please, first. Thank you. Just wash it somehow, however you want to do it. Thank you. A generation time means how long it takes for one generation to come about, right? So for bacteria, their generation time is 20 minutes. Like in 20 minutes, you can go from like parent bacteria to offspring bacteria, right? For humans, obviously, it's a lot longer. For elephants, etc., right? So organisms that have a faster generation, a shorter generation time, can theoretically could evolve faster, right? Because they can, develop mutations and things faster. Whereas an organism that has a really long generation time probably isn't going to be adapting that fast as a population. Gestation is basically how long the baby stays inside the mother during pregnancy, right? So for humans, gestation is 9 months.
What?
Nothing. Okay, can you go see if they're okay?
Mommy, now I know how to wash my own hands.
Good. Okay. Right now, I can't talk to you about that. I need you to go over there. Thank you. Okay, so other questions you guys might have? A fused chromosome. Again, a fused chromosome is, we didn't talk about this. I don't need you to know about the fused chromosomes, but the fused chromosome is the background for the idea that humans and chimps share a lot of DNA, right? And so the idea is that we see a lot of similarities in their DNA, and then one sort of additional piece of evidence that suggests a common ancestor is that we have 46 chromosomes, they have 48. So it's thought that two of their chromosomes fused together, or in the common ancestor, two of the chromosomes fused together to become R46. What is a non-example of evolutionary fitness? I'm not sure what I mean by non-example. I'm just going to go with evolutionary fitness. Evolutionary fitness is, again, the idea of reproduction, right? The more babies you have, the more you contribute to the gene pool, the higher your evolutionary fitness. Could all of our chromosomes fuse together? Yes. Are they likely to? No. I wouldn't worry about I would just know about the general idea of lactose, the video, and how it connects between the genes for lactose, etc., persistence or tolerance, etc., and how it, how it is, similar to the not similar to how cultural aspects tie into that. Small populations are more likely to be affected by chance, because it's not that they're more likely to be affected by chance. Chance has a bigger impact on them, right? If you imagine I have like a million organisms, and then something happens to just a few of those organisms, it's not going to really have a huge impact on the population at large. But if my population is like 20 organisms, and now something happens, like 1 out of 20 is a much bigger deal than like 1 out of a million, right? No, thank you. Go over there, please.
On which class is this?
This is biology. I need you to let me talk to them, please. Thank you. Plasticity just means the ability to change and adapt, right? So generalists are things that are very plastic, not in like the Tupperware plastic, but the idea like they can change pretty easily. The difference between convergent and divergent evolution is the idea that no, Sammy, I need you to go outside and clear the room. If you're gonna be no. Okay, please stop. Sorry, guys. You need to go with Daddy right now, please. Gina, help her. Go help her. Sorry, guys. Daddy has to take her out. Sorry. She's very upset about not biking. Okay, Gina, close the door, please. Close the door, please. Thank you. Sorry, this has proved to be a very chaotic review video. So humans, on the total scale, yes, humans don't have like super high evolutionary fitness, right? In the sense that like, do we have as many babies as we possibly have? No, but we're still doing just fine. Plasticity is not on the test. No, it's just a concept. It's just the idea that we put out there when we talked about like who was selected for by humans in activity. Okay, so I was saying the difference between convergent and divergent evolution. Divergent evolution is the idea that you have this common ancestor and then things branch off from that, right? So if you had a common ancestor and organisms branched out such that like they had different environments. So maybe one was in a certain environment and became this way. Maybe you had like longer fur, but another one had like shorter fur, right? And they diverge, meaning they branch off. That's divergent evolution. Adaptive radiation is a similar concept that we talked about on the human evolution video. Convergent evolution is the idea that they don't actually have a common ancestor, but because their environments are similar and their selection pressures are similar, then they evolve similar adaptations. Other than selection pressures and mutations and variation, what are the factors of natural selection? I mean, the factors are who survives the best, and so that really just depends on the environment, right? The idea being you have a variety of organisms, and if you have now a situation where some are able to survive better than others, then they're going to be the ones that survive and reproduce, and they're going to be the ones that pass their genes on to the next generation. Okay, I'm not going to get too much into the humans and maximum number of kids a human can have at a time. I mean, that's not really relevant for our test. But if we're talking about evolutionary fitness, then if a person had a baby every time they could, right, then that would be the maximum number. I'm going to leave it there, though, because we're not going to get too far into that. What's the difference between homologous, analogous, and vestigial structures? I mean, so on the human thing too, like if you want to know more, I'm happy to talk to you about it. But just right now, given time, we have like 3 minutes left. I don't want you to get too distracted with that because it's not on your exam. Okay. Let's see. So what's the difference between homologous, analogous, and vestigial structures? Okay, so I already talked about homologous and analogous before. I'm going to restate those really quickly. Homologous means similar structure but different function, right? So it indicates a common ancestor and divergent evolution. Analogous structures means you have not similar structures but similar functions. So it indicates similar selection pressures and convergent evolution. Vestigial structures then is the idea that there are some structures that you still find in organisms but don't seem to have any use anymore. And what that is, it indicates that the ancestor had them, but they don't really have a function anymore. But they also didn't necessarily hurt the organism, so they're kind of just still around, right? your tailbone is a good example of a vestigial structure. We don't have tails, we don't need tails, but you still have a tailbone, etc. Morphology is body structures. Hybridization is basically DNA and coming together. I didn't really talk about that term. I don't need to know it, but don't worry about that. Reproductive isolation is the idea that it's the overall concept that organisms that cannot reproduce, who are blocked from reproducing with each other, right? And that could be through mechanical isolation or temporal isolation or behavioral isolation or geographical isolation. Okay. I think I've gotten everybody's questions. I don't know if there's any more, but let me know if there are. I am going to have to wrap it up soon. So unless you guys have any more right now, then we'll probably wrap it up quickly. As a reminder, you can also come and see me tomorrow if you have questions. You can email me with questions tonight or tomorrow. There are, again, review sheets online. There's already a key to the evolution quiz review, but I will also put the other stuff on there. Let's see. Johnny, I'm not sure what your question was. Let me see. Oh, if you graph how population changes over time, how would different selection pressures change that graph? Well, so it would depend. I mean, so first of all, what you're graphing has to be a particular trait, right? Let's just say it was like neck length, or actually, neck length, right? So the graph itself would just be the trait itself and how it changes over time. So different selection pressures could change that graph, because if you have something that makes the neck length go down, then you would see this steady decline in the average neck length. But if now, let's say at year like 13, something happens that actually makes larger neck length an advantage, you would now see it to climb back up. So essentially, what you would see in that graph would just be a reflection of the selection pressures, but you wouldn't see the actual selection pressure, right? You would have to go back and say, well, what happened at this point in time that causes the population's traits to start changing again? Or why does it continually, decrease or increase, etc.? Does that help a little bit? Hopefully. Okay, let me see if anybody else has another question that I missed then. Again, I don't know the exact number of questions because I'm still working on it. My estimate is probably somewhere between 40 to 45 questions. Just like all the other tests. It's not unique in any way. And that'll be a combination of short answer, multiple choice, matching, etc. No problem. Okay, so final questions. You could expect that the multiple choice or every question is worth 1 point, but like for a larger short answer question, it could be worth anywhere from 2 points for a small short answer question. A larger short answer question could be worth up to 5 to 10 points. It just depends on how extensive the question is. 10 is probably a bit excessive. Maybe 5 to 7, I would say. Okay, so good question. Intelligent design is, in some ways, we didn't teach it because it's not, it's sort of like the opposite of evolution, right? Intelligent design is that general idea that organisms are essentially striving towards perfection, that they are designed to be, as well designed and perfect for their environment as they could be. It's sort of, like I said, sort of the antithesis to the theory of evolution. I haven't done the math, so I don't know what percentage is, but yes, probably however many more. How much do you need to know genetic drift? I think I want you to know what genetic drift is, right? So the idea that the population is changing by chance. I would want you to know the examples of genetic drift. So know what bottleneck effect is, know what founder's effect is, know how those would then cause the population to change. The key for both is the idea that you have an original population with a certain allelic frequency. And then what you do then in that case is, if it's bottleneck effect, then by chance organisms are eliminated, and then who's left rebuilds and the population doesn't look like the original population. Or in founders effects, the idea that groups leave and that new population that they start is now not representative of the original. In terms of intelligent design, timing wise, I'm going to say let's not go there right now. I'm happy to talk to you about it then. You're right. Definitions of perfection are different. It's just the concept. And again, we can talk about that later, but I don't want to confuse people at the moment with that. So feel free to come and talk to me during tutorial or whatnot if you want to ask more questions about that. But for now, I don't want to mix the ideas on the review. Okay. Last call. Any questions? Yes, VIST will definitely be one of your short answer questions. So know your VIST. There could be potentially, I'm still deciding, there might be other short answer questions, but for sure you'll see a VIST. Again, morphology is the idea of body structures. Hybridization typically refers to actually it depends on how you think of hybridization. A hybrid could be the joining of two different species to create an organism that's not a new species. But also in the DNA sense, it means attaching one piece of DNA to another piece of DNA. For VIST, I would say, you should be prepared to draw an evolutionary tree. I can't promise that you are or not, but you should be able to draw one, given, enough information. That being said, like I said, I'm not saying I'm not going to just say draw me an evolutionary tree randomly. It would be in context of information you're given. For VIST selection, I would say it's not an exact length, but I would say 2 to 3 sentences is ideal. And yes, you should talk about, so think of S as 3 little parts to S. Subsections of S would be who's selected for or against. Remember, pick one. Why are they selected for or against that thing? And then lastly, as a result, they survive and reproduce. So Haranya, I see you're asking about phenotype plasticity and learned behavior on the VIST. I can't guarantee that. I can tell you, I didn't talk about that with my students. So I would say you might want to ask your own teacher about that, because it sounds like that may have been covered a little bit more. So I don't want to say yes or no in that sense. So I would say definitely ask your specific bio teacher, because I don't know if that was covered more for your class than mine. For my students, I don't expect them to be able to write about that, no, because I didn't talk about it. Let's see. The lab from last Monday. Sorry, I'll get your question 1 second. Do you mean the human evolution lab? Which lab are you referring to, Anita? And John, you're very welcome. Sorry about all the extra chaos in the back with my children. Okay, outgroups. Let's talk about outgroups for a second. And yes, Sana, you should know the vitamin D skin color article. That's why we went over it in class today. So outgroups, yes, are like outliers in a cladogram, right? When you have an outgroup, it means they're the ones that are off to the side and sort of the least similar to everybody else. Primitive traits are the idea that there are certain traits that are found in that sort of common ancestor, and you continue to see them later on. They're essentially maintained. Maintains maybe not the best word. They are still present in later organisms. Okay, any other questions? Does this mean they're the most least evolved and the one with the most primitives? You mean the outgroup? No, the outgroup just means they're the most different, right? I mean, it doesn't have to be that they're the least evolved. Like it could be a kangaroo. That's your outgroup, right? Just because it's like way different from everybody else that you're looking at. Oh, yes. So intro to cladograms. Yeah. So essentially, like I said, I want you to be able to look at a cladogram. I want you to be able to understand a cladogram. I want you to be able to say, based on that cladogram, who's more closely related to whom. But I don't need you to know the specific cladograms in that worksheet. Okay, let's see. Johnny, I'm gonna save your question and have you come talk to me later about that one because I think again that's not one we talked about. And I don't want to confuse people with extra information there. So it's a good question, but let's wait on that one. Okay. Okay. Really, last call now because I better go make sure my kiddos are okay. Anything else? Okay, you're very welcome. Again, you can come find me anytime, 103, 105, email me, etc. And I'm really sorry the original, like, for the first half, there was so much extra noise. My children are extra boisterous today. So, all right, everyone, make sure you get some rest. Email me if you have any questions. I will put the evolution guide key up tonight. Oh, thank you. I'll put the key up tonight. And third period, I will see you guys tomorrow. All right. Bye, guys. Good night.